Hello, my dear students, and welcome back to our fun read. As you know, that or may not know, we're getting very close to the end of this book. In fact, there's today's video and tomorrow's video, and we'll be done. And then we'll be moving on to the next book. So for today, we're going to be reading chapters 16 through 19. And then tomorrow, we're going to be finishing the book. With that being said, chapter 16. 221B, Baker Street. Once back on board their boat for the return trip to London, Christina asked her brother, "Do you think it was them? Do you think it was the guys we saw at Big Ben?" Grant was jammed into the corner seat, with his knees tucked under his arms. His hair was sweaty from running so fast, and stood straight up where he had swiped it with the palm of his hand. "I don't know," he said. "I'm not sure. All these guys seem to look alike. How can we tell one shaggy-headed, bearded guy from another? Especially if they're all wearing grungy clothes and beat-up old backpacks." "Good question," asked George. "Perhaps we should stop here for some help." The kids looked to see that Grant is indicating the stop coming up. A notice board listed the nearby attractions. One of them was 2001-21 B Baker Street, home of the famous fictional detective Sherlock Holmes. Without a word, the kids hopped off the boat when it stopped. Maggie led the way. It seemed like she had been every place in London, on either school field trips or Saturday holiday outings with her family. "So we think Mr. Holmes will help us solve the mystery?" Grant asked as they approached the building. The others laughed. "What's so funny?" demanded Grant. "Sherlock Holmes isn't real," Christina reminded him. "He's a fictional detective created by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle." "But I've seen him in so many old movies Mimi likes to watch," argued Grant. "He wears a cool-looking hat and a cape and smokes out of a big pipe." "That's called a deerstalker hat," said Maggie, meaning the hat that flaps on both sides on the top and the bill on both sides of the front and the back. Meh. "That was just an actor playing the detective." "Well, that makes him a defect detective in my book, if he's not even real," Grant said. Christina thought how it was often difficult to sort out fact from fiction. Maybe this whole idea of a couple terrorist-type thugs trying to blow up Big Ben was really just their imagination carrying away with red herrings. She figured she better not mention red herrings in front of Grant, or he would look all around for a fish, instead of false clues to a mystery that possibly didn't exist. Now she had confused herself, she thought. How does Mimi keep mysteries straight when she writes them? She wondered. Just then the door to 221B Baker Street burst open, and Sherlock Holmes's housekeeper, or the person hired to pretend to be her, beckoned them into the detective's room. The kids looked and listened and eventually wandered up the stairs to the 4th floor, where Christina bought Mimi a bright yellow deerslayer hat just for fun. When they were back outside, Grant said, "Well, did that help us any?" "It made me want to read some Sherlock Holmes novels," said George. "It made me hungry and tired," said Grant. "We've been gone all day. Can't we go home now?" Christina looked around. It was getting very late in the afternoon, and she had no idea how far away they were from the bus stop, or a walk back to the hotel. "I think I know the way from here," Maggie said. "Follow me." And so the tired children first marched, then trudged after Maggie as she led them down the cobblestone streets, narrow alleys, and twisted thickleways until it was clear that she was lost. To make things worse, it was all but dark. Christina knew Mimi and Papa would be worried, maybe even angry at them. But then they had something more to worry about. because behind them they could hear double, heavy footsteps steadily marching their way. They were being followed. Chapter 17. Run! Run! Christina screamed suddenly, and the kids took off, racing and stumbling their way in the dusk until fortunately they burst out onto the busy street, with a big red bus headed their way. As soon as it stopped, the children hopped aboard. Christina just hoped it was headed in the right way. As the kids slumped exhaustedly in their seats at the back of the bus, Christina asked, "Did anyone have time to turn around and look?" "Look at what?" said Maggie in aggravation. "Didn't you hear the footsteps?" Christina asked. "I did," said George. Grant was strangely silent. "Grant," Christina urged, "didn't you see anything?" Grant had been the last in line, confessed. "I did look behind me real quick." "And?" Christina pleaded, but it was clear Grant did not want to say what he had seen. "You have to tell us," his sister insisted. Grant blew out a burst of air. "I saw that detective, Sherlock Holmes. He had on a big creepy cape, and this stupid hat, and a big pipe was hanging from his mouth." "But Grant," said Maggie, "we told you Sherlock Holmes was just a fictional character." "No," said Christina. "If Grant says that's who he saw, that's who he saw." She believed her little brother. She just didn't understand. As Mimi would say, the plot thickens. Fortunately, the bus was not only going in the right direction, but dropped them off right in front of the Ritz. The bellman whisked them inside. He stood over them, wagging his finger in their faces, and Christina thought that meant they would be in big trouble. "Your Mimi and Papa have a message," she began. "And your grandfather's the same," he added, nodding to Maggie and Grant. "They have gone to a reception at Madame Thusted's, and you are to clean up and join them. Your grandfather brought your clothes over," he told Maggie and George. There's a typo, sorry. "I will send you a taxi." Whew, thought Christina. She felt sure that they would have gotten a good talking to for being so late if Mimi and Papa had still been here. With no questions asked, she urged the other kids towards the elevator. "We'd better hurry." "Who is this madam?" asked Grant, once they were in the elevator and headed up to their room. "A friend of Mimi's?" The other kids laughed, and Grant frowned. "It's okay, Grant," said his sister. "Madame Thust's is a famous wax museum." "Oh, fun," said Grant. "We have to get dressed up so we can see wax." Maggie started to explain, but Christina shushed her. "Let's surprise him." She whispered, and Maggie giggled and nodded. Soon the kids had gotten dressed and went back downstairs and sped off in the taxi the bellman had hailed for them. Grant was curious. "So, is it like beeswax, earwax, car wax, furniture polish?" He had everyone giggling, and even the driver. "Just wait and see," Christina insisted. Finally they arrived, and Papa greeted them at the door. Come in," he said. "Mimi has been looking for you, you know. Find her if you can." The children hurried inside. They were glad to see that there were tables of snacks and sodas, but Christina assured them that they had better find Mimi first, then eat. Maggie and George rushed off to find their grandfather. Christina and Grant headed over in the other direction. There was quite a crowd of people there for a reception, and Christina wondered how they would ever find Mimi. As they waded through the room after room, Grant finally tugged at the back of Christina's jacket. "Look at all these famous people," Grant said. Christina turned and gave her brother a puzzled look. You know these people?" she asked in surprise. "Don't you?" said Grant. "I saw Elvis Presley, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and William Shakespeare, and even the Queen. But none of them spoke to me. Grant looked thoughtful. Hey, he added, aren't some of those people supposed to be dead? And I haven't seen any wax yet. Christina laughed and gave her brother a hug. Oh, Grant, believe me, you're seeing gobs and gobs of wax. She waved her arms around. All these people are made of wax. That's what the madam did. She made wax figures of famous people. They look very real, don't they? Grant looked like he could hardly believe what his sister was saying. They look creepily real, he admitted, but those guys are looking too real. Christina turned to see what her wide-eyed brother was looking at. She couldn't be sure, but the two waiters, in their cutaway tuxedo jackets, looked just like the two guys they had seen at the Globe. Their bushy hair was tied behind their heads in ponytails. They were serving drinks and food from silver trays and had not spotted the children in the crowd. Let's go find Mimi and Papa and tell them, Grant insisted. Tell them what? Christina asked. We have no proof that they are the terrorists. Suddenly, a very large woman that Christina thought might have been a wax figure swished around and accosted her. What did you say, young lady? She demanded Christina. What's this about a Big Ben being bombed? Instantly, everyone was staring at the two children. To make things worse, Christina could see Mimi, Papa, and Mr. Bryan peeking up over the crowd, trying to make their way forward to see what was going on. Christina hated being on the spotlight. She had no idea what to say. Grant, on the other hand, was his youthfully silly self. He began to pose this way and that way, as if he were a wax figure trying to figure out a proper pose. Some of the adults giggled at Grant's antics. The very large woman stalked off in disgust, and the rest of the adults began to wander away as well. Christina was relieved, and yet Mimi and Papa were still heading their way. So was Mr. Bryan, with Maggie and George tagging along. As Mimi approached, Grant grabbed her around the leg, which were covered by a long, beautiful, black, silky skirt. Is it really you, Mimi? Grant teased. He reached up and pinched her rosy cheeks as she bent down to give him a hug. Is that you, or are you a wax Mimi? Everyone laughed, and Christina was thrilled to see that none of them had appeared to have heard the question of the loud woman had been asking. But Mr. Bryan had heard. Mimi and Papa led the kids off to get snacks. Mr. Bryan lagged behind with Christina. As they walked towards the tables filled with food, he whispered to her. Be careful, Miss Christina, he advised gently. I have heard rumors myself this very day. It's probably nothing, but you kids need to stay away from Big Ben. Promise? When they reached the tables, Christina took a glass of lemonade. As she took a big gulp, she muttered, promise, which apparently Mr. Bryan took for the word promise. But Christina wasn't promising. She was gasping. Why? Because across the table, the two bushy-haired waiters were giving her the evil eye. And the next thing she knew, they had disappeared out the side door. Chapter 18. Her Majesty the Queen. The next day was the big day. Mimi was all in her attire and making sure everyone else was looking nice too. Oh, I hope this is okay to wear, she fussed, trying on her fourth dress of the morning. I thought I knew what I wanted to wear, but now I'm so confused. Don't get so flustered, Papa soothed her. It's only the Queen. Only the Queen! Mimi squealed, and Christina and Grant burst out laughing. They had been scrubbing and dressing and groomed until Grant revolted and ran out into the hallway to escape. Christina was busy practicing her curtsy over and over and over again. Papa looked handsome in his three-piece suit and said he was cool as a cucumber, but Christina noticed his forehead was sweaty. Nonetheless, soon they were all ready, as they would ever be, for their audience with the Queen. They had the bellman make their picture before they climbed into the glamorous black town car that Mr. Bryan had arranged for them. Wait, no Cinderella carriage? Grant grumbled, but Christina knew that he was just as excited to sit here as well. It wasn't every day that you got to go to a real-life palace and meet the real, live queen. Butterflies fitted her tummy. Christina was thrilled as Buckingham Palace, home of the Queen of England, came into view. She remembered watching the video of a fairy tale wedding of Princess Diana. Christina didn't understand politics yet, but she realized and she knew that this was a special moment for them because England had such a long history. In fact, America was sort of still a baby compared to England. We talked about that this year, actually. Or that's what her social studies teacher had told her. I'm that social studies teacher. Oh no. Wow, said Grant as they entered the Grand Palace's gates. They had arrived just in time to see the famous changing of the guard. They hasted to get out of the car just to see the ceremony go underway. Christina thought that the pageantry of the black, red, and gold uniforms was grand. She saw Grant making silly faces, trying to make the stern-looking guards respond. This is until Papa gave Grant a stern look of his own. Christina had been to Washington, D.C. and enjoyed her tour of the White House and the nation's Capitol building. But she thought all the royal grandeur, fancy coaches, flags and pendants, brass horns and drums was even more exciting. Mimi gave her a wink, and Christina grinned back. Soon the ceremony was over, and the driver handed them off to the elegant, dapper-looking gentleman who led them towards the palace and their meeting with the Queen. Christina discovered that she was trembling when she remembered what Mimi said. The Queen is just very nice and smart and talented woman who just happens to be the Queen of England. So just be yourself, be polite, and follow my lead. Christina repeated this advice to herself under her breath a few times. And the next thing she knew, they were inside the palace, and she was making a curtsy in front of the Queen. Grant made a quick, deep bow, and Christina was glad he didn't have any fake noises to his performance. And then backed away from the Queen as if she were a mean old schoolteacher. Mimi and Papa beamed proudly. The Queen gave them a big smile, and before Christina knew it, Mimi and the Queen were talking nonstop about the value of reading good books and laminating that their grandchildren watched too much TV and played too many computer games in their spare time. But I'm certain these children are dedicated readers, the Queen said, looking right at Grant and Christina. Oh, we have to be, Grant volunteered. Our Mimi writes books. Besides, we like to catch her mistakes. Everyone laughed nervously, except for the Queen, who laughed heartily at Grant's sincere confession. People like to catch my mistakes too, she admitted back to Grant in a teasing voice. Oh, I'm sure a queen never makes mistakes, Christina blurted, in spite of Mimi's admonition to speak unless spoken to. I said that word wrong, but it's okay. The Queen gave Christina a friendly but serious look, as if they both shared a special secret. Oh, said the Queen, everyone makes mistakes, especially young girls who try too hard to solve mysteries in a foreign country. Christina almost gasped. Mimi and Papa looked puzzled, but before anyone could think too hard about what the Queen had said, their audience was over, and they were briskly escorted away so the Queen could meet her other guests. Back outdoors in the bright sunlight, Christina felt faint. Had she just been warned by the Queen? Or was Her Royal Highness just teasing her? Strangely, Christina could imagine the Queen as a young girl her age, perhaps rather rambunctious and getting into mild mischief on occasion. "Hey, Christina," Grant whispered as they climbed in the back seat of the town car. "I think Queenie has her eye on you." Christina shivered. The Queen, Scotland Yard, the dead defective detectives, Mimi, Papa, Mr. Bryan, who knows who else, and two shaggy-haired men who were either innocent students, dangerous terrorists, or what? "My stomach hurts," says Christina. "No problem," said Papa. "We're here." As they got out the car, Mimi put her arms around Christina and Grant both and gave them a big hug. "You did a great job," she said, much to Christina's relief. "It's all over, Christina, and we're going to wash down your butterflies with a big glass of water." "What do you mean, we get to drink?" Grant asked. "No, what do you think?" Papa asked. "No way," said Grant. "But I guess you mean we get to drink something a little bit more than water, something fizzy and cold. I could go for a few chocolate-slathered brownies on the side." Papa laughed and held the gate open to a beautiful little garden cafe by the Thames. Christina was thrilled to see Maggie and George and Mr. Bryan waiting for them by the window, at two round tables beneath a beautiful willow tree. She felt better instantly. "How was it?" The three greeted them eagerly. "I'm so jealous," drawled Maggie. "I've never met the Queen." She gave her grandfather a look. "Well, maybe when I get to be made a knight, you can meet her," he teased. "Of course, you'll have to call me Sir then." George groaned. "We have to call you Sir now." Mr. Bryan roared, laughing. "But then you'd have to call me Sir Granddad." Everyone laughed and sat down, and the adults began to talk about the exciting events that day at their larger table. Quickly the four children scooted their chairs closer together around their smaller table and began to compare notes. "The Queen fussed at Christina," Grant told right off. "Did not," Christina countered. "Did too," Grant said, shaking his head up and down for the other two children. They piled their plates full with tiny cucumber sandwiches, tea cakes, scones, and something Maggie said was a clotted cream, and munched away hungrily. Tall fizzy pink drinks and colorful paper parasols with thin red straws were set down by the waiter. "What did she actually say?" Maggie said eagerly. "Will your name be on the front of the newspaper?" "Will you be on the nightly news?" George asked hopefully. Christina stomped her foot on the grass beneath the table. "No way. She just said I should not be such an eager beaver mystery solver," she paraphrased. "The Queen said eager beaver?" George asked doubtfully. "Hush, George," said Maggie. "That's beside the point." And then she turned to Christina seriously. "Do you think the Queen has heard the same rumors that Grandfather has? He's been on the phone a lot with Scotland Yard detective. I don't know what's up, but he won't let us out of his sight." Chapter 19. Last Warning. Later that night, Christina grew very somber. They were back at the Ritz, and Maggie and George were getting to spend the night in a large suite. The adults had gone to some gala at the Tat Museum. Mimi and Papa were on a big gallus. Mimi was still on cloud 9 after having met the Queen. Christina was exhausted and had a headache. The boys were watching cartoons in their pajamas in the other room. Maggie just sat waiting for Christina to perk up. "What's wrong?" she asked her American friend. Christina rubbed her head. "I'm not sure," she confessed. "It's just that the adults have shut us out of this mystery. If there is indeed one. It's like they want us to get lost for a while, to solve a mystery, if there is one. And yet, they act like there's no mystery, that we're just kids being silly, causing trouble. Maggie sighed and held her friend's hand. I think they just want us to be safe. We are kids after all, and bombs are very dangerous things. I know, said Christina, but they won't even listen to us. Maybe we are wrong. But what if we're right? What if Big Ben really is in danger? A bomb could hurt people, not to mention destroy a historic clock. The girls looked up, surprised to see Grant standing in the doorway. He was almost in tears. Oh, there is a mystery, he said, his voice quivering. Grant had taken a nap when they came back to the hotel after tea, and Christina thought he must have had a bad dream. Or maybe something on his stupid battle cartoons frightened him. What is it, Grant? She asked gently. Reluctantly, Grant pulled a piece of paper from his back pocket. I found this, he said, in the back of the town car after we left the cafe. I guess someone tossed it in there. He handed it to his sister, and she read, I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want the Queen to come lock you up in a dungeon if you did anything about it. A single tear trickled down his cheek. Christina could tell he was truly afraid. She looked down and read the note aloud to all of them, including George, who had followed Grant into the room. To the kids who keep following us around, it would be very dangerous for you to go back to Big Ben tonight before midnight. Mind your business and stay safe. Interfere your peril, or at your own peril. Do not, repeat, do not go to Big Ben tonight. Remembereth what we say, and mindeth that you stay away. Last warning. Wow, said Christina. This means whatever is going to happen tonight. Maybe we're too late. Maggie shook Christina by the shoulders. Christina, this is not one of your grandmother's kid mysteries. This is real life. We cannot go to Big Ben. We can call Granddad and tell him, George suggested. Before the others could respond, he grabbed the telephone and dialed Mr. Bryan's cell phone number. When he did not answer, George left a message. Meet us at Big Ben right away. Try Mimi and Papa, Grant urged his sister. Christina grabbed the phone and dialed their cell phone number. That she knew by heart. There was no answer, and she figured that the cell phones didn't work inside the building, because Mimi and Papa always answered. When the recorded message ended, Christina pleaded into the phone, Mimi, Papa, we can't help it. We've got to save Big Ben. Meet us there before midnight. When she put the phone down, she stared at the others. Well, she said gravely, do we have to try to save Big Ben or not? Grant, you could stay here. No way, squealed Grant, slapping his hands on his hips. I was the first to see these guys and scribbled on the clock tower, he reminded them. I'm not afraid. Let's go before it's too late. If the Queen doesn't like it, well, Grant sputtered. Well, she might just have to buy herself a watch for Christmas. That is actually funny. And that is the end of our fun read today. I will see you guys tomorrow with the end of our book. Bye, everybody.